Good evening, everybody, and welcome in. Just have a quick Bible lesson for you tonight. So, we're going to go over Psalm 41, which is one of my personal favorite Psalms. I didn't necessarily plan on doing this, but there was some inclement weather, and because of that, I didn't have a Bible study to go to myself. So, I just decided to do a study on my own, and I kind of turned it into a lesson for everybody else. So, I figured you guys can be the beneficiary of that. So, if you're watching, welcome in and thank you so much for being with us here. We're just going to be going through a pretty standard Bible class tonight, but it is on Psalm 41, like I said, which is one of my all time favorites. So, we'll go ahead and take a look at the lesson here this evening. So, you can see here Psalm 40, and there's a quote there that's actually from verse 8. The theme that I would surmise of the 40th Psalm is it's both praise and gratitude. And we're going to get into some of what that means and what the psalmist means. This is a psalm of David. So we're going to get into some of the details on that. But there is this symbiotic relationship between both praise and gratitude, praising God and being grateful for his blessings, praising him for blessing us, and then in our gratitude, the proper and correct response to that being praise to him for that. So that's something that we see as kind of a running theme throughout the 40th Psalm. So we're going to go ahead and get into that tonight. First of all, like I said, this is a Davidic psalm, and this is a personal psalm of thanksgiving and praise. So most of the psalms are divided into two categories. They're either corporate praise, corporate thanksgiving, corporate lament. They're either something that is intended to be for the congregation, or they're what we call a personal psalm. And that would be what we're talking about tonight, because all of the psalms are both songs and prayers. You can use them as prayers, you can use them as songs for singing purposes. Any of those are an appropriate use of the Psalms as we see them. And when it comes to this particular Psalm, this is a Davidic Psalm, and it is one that he uses personally and expects other people to use personally for thanksgiving and praise. Doesn't mean you can't sing it in a group of people, doesn't mean you can't read it aloud or praise God in this way corporately. It just means that when we're dividing up the Psalms and looking at their different aspects, this is one that was always intended to be for and was written for the purpose of personal praise and thanksgiving. It also does something really interesting, and this is a fascinating thing about the 40th Psalm. It actually reverses the normal pattern that we normally see of petition and then thanksgiving. So normally what happens is you see thanksgiving first, and then petition comes afterward. That's normally how it happens. There's some level of praise, there's some acknowledgement of God and his sovereignty, or praise of God and what he has done. And then you move into the part of the psalm where the psalmist is asking for something, wants something from God, would make a request of him. This one kind of does the reverse of that. So what you see here is you see petition and thanksgiving. And the interesting thing is, even though this is not really technically a lament psalm, you see an awful lot of lament at the very beginning. And so a lot of the psalms follow this pattern to where there is thanks, there is praise, there is some level of gratitude expressed by the psalmist, and then he gets into some of his personal problems or things that he wants God to do. And then, even though there is this sort of conflict, so it's almost like a little mini story. There is a conflict and then a resolution, and then the psalmist or the singer comes back to praising God and having faith in him and being grateful for his benefits and his blessings. So that's a really interesting thing that normally happens in the Psalms, but this one actually kind of breaks that a little bit, because you'll see as we get into the text itself, it actually starts out with lament and starts out with problems that he wants to express to God and wants God to help him out with. And so we'll see how it kind of breaks that pattern that we normally see in the Psalms. And another thing about it is very likely written after a military victory or a triumph over illness. So we don't know exactly when this psalm was written. There are some psalms that have notes at the top that when the whoever the psalter is, whenever he combines and puts together the psalms, he not only includes the text of the psalm itself, but he also includes some details about it. Like we know, for example, the 51st psalm is specifically one of the psalms that is in reaction to David's sin and repenting of that sin with Bathsheba. This one is likely written after he had some sort of military victory. Another option is that it could have been after he overcame some kind of illness. Either way, just based on some of the text we have, that's really all we know about it. It could have been something else, but we're pretty sure it was one of those two things. It's more likely the military victory thing, but it very well could have been some kind of triumph over illness. We know that even though David was generally speaking a very healthy person and he spent a lot of his time at war, there are some times where he gets a little bit older and he may have had to deal with an illness or two, and maybe that is what it is. But regardless, let's go ahead and get into the text. Psalm 40, verses 1 through 3. I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry. He brought me up out of the pit of destruction, out of the miry clay. He set my feet upon a rock, making my footsteps firm. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and will trust in the Lord. So, a few things that I want to point out specifically in this particular psalm and the text of it. First of all, the waiting implies some kind of faith. So, you see right there, right out of the gate, he says, I waited patiently for the Lord. So, you don't wait on something unless you have a reasonable expectation for it coming. Like, even if it is not reasonable or necessarily to other people, if you are waiting on something, it implies that you believe that there's at least a good chance or a possibility that it's going to happen. You know, when you are a little kid, for example, you're waiting on your parents to come home. Well, you don't do that if you're used to your parents not coming home. That's something that you do when you expect your dad or your mom to walk through the door at some point. And after a while, like when they do it over and over again, and then maybe they stop, then you still hold out hope and maybe that's not coming. But regardless, the fact that you are waiting means there is some anticipation and there is some hope that that is going to take place. And so, whatever it is the psalmist is dealing with, it means that he is patiently waiting on the Lord's response to this. And then in verse 2, we see that really it is a terrifying thing not to have sure footing. And this is something that if you've ever fallen down, even if it's just like a slip or something like that, it's very scary for a couple of seconds to not know where you're going to land. But it's even more scary when you are doing something, and this is sort of the implication here, like climbing, or if you've ever had to wade through a bog or something that didn't have very sure footing. You know, that's a scary thing to have the ground just kind of collapse out from under you. There have been many a time where I had to walk through some kind of muck or some kind of unstable ground, and I didn't know if the next step my feet were going to be above the water or above the mud or under the mud. And that is something that can be very scary when you don't trust the ground that you're walking on to hold your feet up. And so that's really powerful symbolism, and especially people that lived less comfortable lives and lived outside working with livestock a lot or having to travel a lot or going to war, that kind of thing. So that's something that can be very scary and that people would have understood here. And if you've ever had to do any work like that, or if you've ever been in a situation where your footing was unsure, you know you're scared to take every step. Taking a step, which is a very normal and natural thing for most humans in most circumstances, all of a sudden becomes something very scary, especially if you could, injure yourself or something like that. And so you have to not even trust the ground underneath your feet, but the psalmist here has faith that God is going to bring him up out of this pit of destruction, out of the miry clay, and is going to set his feet upon a rock. And so now, because God has set you upon a rock, he's set you on sure footing, you no longer have to worry about that. And in the same sort of line of thinking, sin is sort of like a bottomless swamp, isn't it? Because we can't escape it on our own. We need help from somewhere outside to be able to be okay with that. And so there's a really powerful symbolism with sin being like this miry clay, this pit of destruction where there is no escape. And the more you struggle, the further in you fall. And that really speaks to something that we won't see for the theology of it, we won't see for many more years, but this is sort of a hint of it, that this idea that Paul will express very in a lot of words, like he talks a lot about this, for example, in the book of Romans, where he's very express about, and he also talks about it a good bit in Colossians and Galatians as well. He'll say, look, you can't get out of this thing on your own. You're not going to be able to work your way to salvation. You're not going to be able to work your way into God's favor. You're a sinner. You've broken the law, and you cannot escape that unless somebody that is not in that swamp of sin, that has not fallen into that trap, comes to help you out. Because if there's two of you stuck in the swamp, well, then you're just both stuck. Like, you're not going to be able to help each other in that situation. And so because of that, you need somebody from outside who has not fallen into that mire, into that sin, to be able to throw you a rope or, pull down a tree branch or something and do something to get you out of there. And that, of course, is sort of a foreshadowing of Jesus Christ. Now, in verse 3, we see that praise is the proper response to deliverance. So he puts a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to God. Again, this is sort of that reversal of that pattern that I was talking about earlier. He starts with a petition that he's waiting on the Lord, that he's lamenting, that he's upset that God has not come to rescue him. And then in verse 2, but God brings him up out of the pit, out of the clay. And now, because he has been rescued from the Father, his correct and proper and righteous response to that is that God has put a song in his mouth so that he can praise him. And so this is a really interesting thing that we see here. Even though there are people who see and fear, they will trust God because of his praises that he has given. So they're going to fear the Lord. They're going to see the good that God has done for him. And because of that, he's going to bring him out of that. It reminds me a little bit of First Peter, where in the book of First Peter, Peter is talking about how that we will be testaments to the good that God has done for us. And so there's something really strong and powerful about that symbolism as First Peter chapter 2, where he talks about this, that we are to bear witness to the glory that he has given to us. And so this is exactly the same kind of thing. Like, okay, God has rescued us. He's put our feet on this solid ground. And now because of that, there's a new song in our mouth, a song of praise, a song of joy that we sing, and then other people are going to look around and see what God has done for us, and they're going to praise God as a response to that. So that is a very appropriate way to respond to God's rescue, is to have this kind of praise on our lips. So we'll look in verses 4 through 5. How blessed is the man who has made the Lord his trust, and has not turned to the proud, nor those who lapse into falsehood. Many, O Lord my God, are the wonders which you have done, and your thoughts towards us. There is none to compare with you. If I would declare and speak of them, they would be too numerous to count. So again, a lot of really powerful symbolism, just sort of an outpouring of joy and thanksgiving towards God for what he has done for him, rescuing him from whatever problem it was that he was dealing with. So here's my question when it comes to verse 4. Why do people lie? Think about that for a second. Why do people lie? Why do people say things that are untrue? It's because they don't trust God and they don't trust truth. So that's kind of what verse 4 is talking about, right? It says he's not turned to the proud, nor those who lapse into falsehood. So why is that not the case? Well, because if you're telling a lie, that means on some level you're not trusting God and believing that his word really is what's best for you, and that's why you have neglected to tell the truth. And there is a lack of faith there that God's not going to take care of you. And we could look at several different examples of this throughout the scripture. The first one that comes to my mind is Abraham, because you'll remember twice he told somebody, some king, some local ruler, that he was traveling with Sarah and Sarah wasn't his wife, he was his sister, because he didn't really fully trust that God was going to protect him from that person. So he felt he had to make protection for himself. And that's why he was telling people, I mean, he was lying by omission at the very least. And so he's not telling the truth. And that's because he doesn't trust God's going to protect him. And because of that, he's trying to shield himself with deception. And then the psalmist comes out and he says, God doesn't turn to the proud or those who fall into falsehood. Why? Because they don't trust God. You see, you trust God, you fall into his hands, you trust that his will and the things that he told you to do really are what's best for you. And because of that, God turns his blessings on that person. And that's why verse 4 starts out with, blessed is he who has made the Lord his trust, and then it ends with those who do not fall into falsehood. And so there's a relationship between those two things, right? So those who trust the Lord, they won't engage in falsehood because they trust God to take care of them. Those who do engage in falsehood, that is a sign that they don't fully trust the Lord and fully trust the truth that he tells us to live out. Now in verse 5, we should look at that, and these are really reasons that we should trust in God. So you have verse 4 talking about how we should trust in God, and then verse 5 is sort of his explanation for why we are trusting in God. Because it's sort of like Jacob's transformation in Genesis 32, 24 through 32. For those of you who don't know, that's when Jacob, he literally, his name means liar. That's the actual translation of his name. Liar, trickster, deceiver. That's what Jacob means. And then when Jacob has an encounter with one of God's angels and he asks him what his name is, he has to say, my name is liar. That's what it means in his language. And so the angel says, well, no more will your name be liar. No more will your name be Jacob, but it'll be Israel. And in that language, Israel means to struggle with God. And so there's a change in this. He goes from someone who his actual identity is liar or deceiver, and his identity is changed to one who struggles with God. And so that's a pretty big upgrade when you think about it. But look at this verse and look at the way that it's worded. Many are the wonders that you've done, your thoughts towards us. There is none that compare to you. If I would declare and speak of them, they would be too numerous to count. And so he's giving all these reasons that we should trust God. And then that's kind of what happens with Jacob's transformation, right? He sees all these things that God has done for him. He realizes that God has been with him this whole time and that he has struggled with God and emerged okay. Now he does get injured, but he struggles with God's messenger, his angel there, and he is able to walk away from that after he has done this. And so our trust is not unfounded. There is a basis for it. We have a time that we spend with God, and this was true of Jacob. This was true of his grandfather Abraham. That you see, Abraham's faith is not super strong at the beginning of his journey, and Jacob's isn't either. Jacob has to lie, in his opinion, to protect himself from his brother, to get his birthright that he wants. And then he has to lie to his uncle Laban in order to keep him and his family safe, and then eventually trick him, and then eventually leave him and leave him without telling, and all this stuff. And so his shield his whole life has been, I'm going to lie my way out of this. And so the reason that I brought that transformation up is because this shows that over a period of time, God continues to bless Jacob, continues to bless Jacob, continues to bless Jacob. And then eventually he gets to the point that he's like, I've got all these blessings around me. Maybe I should just trust God. And if you know that story, you know that right after that, because he trusts God and because he has the courage to face his brother, the one that he lied to, the one that he hurt, the one that he deceived, he has that courage. God actually blesses him even more for having the courage to do that. And so it took Jacob over 20 years, but he finally, after all this time with God and trying to, have some kind of relationship with God, he learns over time that he can trust God. And you see the same thing happen with Abraham. Like over time, he comes to the point to where he has so much faith that he's even willing to sacrifice his only legitimate heir, his son who he loves, his promised child, and he's willing to do that. But that doesn't happen overnight. That happens after time and experience and living with God. And that's exactly what is being expressed in this psalm. We don't just trust God because he tells us to, or trust God because he's, it's the right thing to do, even though it is. We trust God because we learn over time how to live with him, and that he has developed that level of trust with us. It's kind of like, have you ever seen a little kid jumping into a swimming pool, like off the diving board or something like that, and their dad is there and he's like, come on, jump, I'll catch you. And, the kid's usually apprehensive. He doesn't want to jump. He's a little scared to jump. And then the dad's like, no, I promise, I've got you. Go ahead and jump. And then if the kid finally does jump and the dad catches him, and then he gets to go back and jump a little bit later, the same thing happens. He may still be a little nervous on the second time, but usually he's a lot more confident that second time. And he may still be a little bit nervous on the third time, but he's even quicker on that third time. And then by the time you get to time 7, 8, 9, something like that, by the time you get there, the kid's not even thinking about it. Like, he has confidence because he has experienced his dad catching him over and over and over again. That's the same thing that's going on in Jacob's life. It's the same thing that happened with Abraham. It's the same thing that's happening in this psalm. He's expressing that there are reasons that we have this trust for God, that we trust in his truth, we trust to do what he tells us to do, and that if we do the things that God tells us to do, even if we don't understand it at the time or it doesn't make sense to us at the time, it all works out for the better in the long run. And that's kind of what he's expressing here. All right, so verses 6 through 8. Sacrifice and meal offering you have not desired. My ears you have opened. Burnt offering and sin offering you have not required. Then I said, behold, I come. In the scroll of the book it is written of me, I delight to do your will, O my God. Your law is within my heart. So this is an interesting one for sure. And one of the reasons I find this one so fascinating is there are a handful, and this is probably the reason that I like this psalm as much as I do. There are a handful of times where we see David express this, and there's also some times where we see some other prophets express this in the Old Testament. Now, you have to understand, to a Jew, like, sacrifice is everything. Going to sacrifice, that's your whole worldview, your whole culture revolves around that. I mean, like, what do you do to feel close to God? Well, you sacrifice for your sin. You go to the temple, you offer a lamb, a goat, a dove, a meal offering, something. You give something up that is yours, and you do that because that's what God told you to do. Your sins are forgiven of you. You go in peace. And sacrifice is just so central to the Jewish faith. If you've read the book of Leviticus, you know there's rules and regulations and specific things you have to do for sacrifices and what sacrifices do in what situation, all through that book. Like that is the core of the Torah. And so because of that, there's this really interesting thing that pops up a few times in the Davidic Psalms, and we'll see it later in some of the other prophets as well. So, for example, we're going to see it in, I believe, Hosea brings this up. I believe Micah brings this up, where God actually rejects the sacrifice if not done with the proper intent behind it, the proper heart. And David is somebody that understands this. We also see this in the 51st Psalm as well. So it was never really about the sacrifices, and that's kind of what he is alluding to here. Now, this is something that I think David had a lot of personal experience with, because even though he wasn't there, he knows the reason that his predecessor, King Saul, is not king over Israel anymore. So if you've read Psalm 15, verses 10 through 23, that whole story is about how Saul has gone to defeat the Amalekites, and Samuel has told him, Saul, go to the valley, go to the Amalekites, kill them, destroy them all, destroy their livestock, everything that moves, everything that don't take any spoil from them. You just go, you basically salt the earth, and that's the end of it. And Saul goes, okay. And then he goes, but he doesn't actually do that. He does kill pretty much all of the people, but he keeps King Agag around. And he also keeps the best livestock. And it's actually one of the funnier verses in the Bible. I laugh every time I think about this, that Samuel shows up and he goes, because God has already told him what happened. Like, God came to him in a vision and told him what happened. And so Samuel shows up that day and he goes, Saul, did you do what I told you to do? Did you kill all the Amalekites and destroy them all and destroy their livestock and not take any sacrifice or sorry, not any sacrifice, any booty, any spoil from them? And Saul's like, yeah, totally did that. And then Samuel's like, well, then why do I hear mooing in the background? That's weird. Why are there baas going on back there? And Saul's like, oh, you meant that livestock. Well, yeah, we kept that livestock alive. So he has to, first of all, he's lying about it again because he doesn't trust in God. We saw that earlier in the Psalm. But also because Saul says, well, yeah, I did save those choice livestock, but it was, for sacrifice. It was totally for sacrifice. What we're going to do is we're going to take the best of the livestock and we were going to come back and we're going to sacrifice to your God. Now, I don't actually buy that story, and I don't think Samuel did either. But even if it was true, even if he totally just decided that he was going to disobey God so that he could bring those animals back to sacrifice for him, he completely missed the point. And in that story, Samuel actually says to obey is better than to sacrifice. And this is something that I'm sure, because he had heard the story, stuck in David's mind, because you'll also see something else that happens throughout David's life is he's terrified that God is going to take the blessing off of him the same way that he took it off of Saul, that he is going to remove his crown and his throne from him and going to find a new king. And David is legitimately afraid of this. We see this expressed multiple times in the Psalms, in the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. We see allusions to it in 1st and 2nd Kings. And so because of that, David is understandably not loving the idea of repeating Saul's mistakes. And because of that, we see passages like this, because it's not actually about the sacrifice. It's what the sacrifice represents. It's the heart behind it, that you're willing to give up something, give up literally the best animal you've got in your entire herd. One, because you're just that sorrowful about your sin and you want to show that you have repented, but also, and I think that this is actually more important, because we see this again when there are other allusions to sacrifice not being the most important thing. Whenever we see that, we see this idea sort of pushed forward that it's really all about the heart. It's about the fact that you were willing to obey. Obedience is actually the thing that makes the sacrifice work. It's not the fact that you killing a bull or a goat or a dove or whatever else it was actually going to appease God and remove your sin from you. Like we know that that's not true. And David got that. Lord knows David was not perfect and he didn't get everything right, but he did get that one right. He understood that when it came to the sacrifices, when it came to the rituals, they were important and you should do them and you should obey them. But it is the obedience itself and the human reaction to a command given to him by his God that God is actually interested in. That's something that David understood and understood very well. So then in verses 7 and 8, he says, "Then I said, behold, I come. In the scroll of the book it was written for me, I delight to do your will, O my God. Your law is within my heart." So again, it goes back to the heart. It goes back to the inner man. And remember that God says David is what? A man after his own heart. Why? Because he is willing to sacrifice his will to trust God. See, that's the sacrifice that God actually cares about. When you take the things that you want, the things that you love, the things that you would prefer, and you say, you know what? God says that's not good for me, or God says I'm supposed to do this. Therefore, whatever I want to do, I'm going to put that on the shelf. I'm going to throw that away. I'm going to throw it into the fires of the altar and burn it, because it's more important to me that I do what my God tells me to do. That's what it means to have the law in your heart, that the law has been internalized to the point to where you act it out in your daily life. And all of this is kind of like just a fascinating look ahead into the New Testament. The sacrifices are going to be done away with. It's all going to be about the law that is written in your heart, the word that is internalized and made a part of you, and then you act that out as a Christian, having the blood of Christ to cover your sin. That's actually what is going to do. And look at the word that's used there in verse 8, I delight to do your will. We don't do it out of grudging or necessity. We don't do it groaning the whole way, or like, oh gosh, I'm mad that I have to listen to this rule, or that God put this rule on me. No. He delights to do his will. It is a joy to him to do so. That's what it means to have the law really within your heart. All right, so verses 9 and 10. I have proclaimed glad tidings of righteousness in the great congregation. Behold, I will not restrain my lips. O Lord, you know. I have not hidden your righteousness within my heart. I have spoken of your faithfulness and your salvation. I have not concealed your loving kindness and your truth from the great congregation. So this is sort of the manifestation of what we've been talking about here. When obedience is really sincere, you want to share it. When you obey God sheerly because you want to do what's right, because you want to be in accordance with God's will, when you want to be presented holy and righteous before him, when that obedience is really sincere, you want to share it to other people. You want to share with other people what God has done for you. You want to be an example, not for your own glory or because of how good you are, but like, I was a sinner. I was a beggar. I had nothing, and look what God did for me. You're like somebody that's been cured of a disease, like we saw in the story with Jesus and the lepers. Like the several times when he would heal somebody, they would go forth like yelling praises to God because they had this disease and they finally been freed of that. When something wonderful like that happens, you want to share it with people. It's not something you want to hide. And so that's what is being expressed here in this psalm, is David saying, God did this great thing for me, whether it was a military victory or healing after being sick or whatever it was. You see, David had been obedient and sincere, and because of that, he wanted to share the joy that he had for all of the other stuff that happened to him, and he wanted other people to know how good God is and how amazing it is to have him on your side, because of that experience that he had. And then in verse 10, that really reminds me of the instruction that Jesus has of, don't hide your light under a bushel, or, when Jesus would heal somebody, like I said, whether it was leprosy or blindness or whatever, people just wanted to go out and proclaim that. You don't hide your light under a bushel, Matthew 5:14 through 16. You don't do that. When you have something wonderful in your life, you don't keep it to yourself. I mean, for goodness sake, there's an entire social media complex that's, this is not the only thing that it does, but a lot of that is people either finding a great product or finding something they like and just going out and telling people publicly about it. Well, that's the kind of people that we should be. I'm not saying necessarily social media specifically, but you know what I mean. That we should be eager and seeking after opportunities to tell other people the good things that God has done for us. And so that's what it means to let your light shine, that you are aware of the fact that you're imperfect and that all of these other things are a problem with you, but ultimately you're able to overcome that. And when you do overcome it, then you, as a person that has been saved, that has been rescued, you want to go out and proclaim that to other people. That's really what that is saying, and the sort of thing that is being expressed there. And it reminds me of a quote by C.S. Lewis. And I love this quote. He says, "I think we delight to praise what we enjoy, because the praise is not merely expresses, but completes the enjoyment. It is frustrating to have discovered a new author and not be able to tell anyone how good he is, to come suddenly at the turn of the road upon some mountain valley of unexpected grandeur, and then have to keep silent because the people you care it no more for it no more than for a tin can in the ditch, to hear a good joke and to find no one to share it with." So this is a really interesting sentiment that Lewis expresses, because I don't think it's something that we think about a lot, but he's absolutely right. And most of the people that within the sound of my voice that heard that, it probably resonated with you quite a bit, didn't it? Because if you find something that you really love, what do you do with it? What is your reaction to that? Well, you want to tell other people about it. You want to tell other people about this great experience that you had. I mean, for goodness sake, guys, we're taking high definition pictures of our food. Like, that's how much we enjoy and delight to praise something that we really like. So when we find a really, really good steak or a really good looking dessert or dish or whatever, we actually take a picture of it and post it on social media for everybody to see, because we want other people to be like, man, look at this. It's so good. Whenever we have a really good piece of food, or we have a great experience or whatever it is, we want other people to have that, to share that experience with other people. That's ingrained in us. It's part of who we are. It's part of what God made us to do. And I'm convinced that part of that is because we like to praise things. And if we are more than willing to take a picture of a really nice looking piece of cheesecake, but we're not willing to do the same with what God has done for us and what he's doing in our lives right now, either we're not recognizing what God is actually doing for us, or we are recognizing it, but we're hiding our light under a bushel. We're refusing to share it. And so because of that, let's really think about that, because if we're not sharing what God has done for us on a fairly regular basis, like a daily basis, then I got to be honest, and I know I've fallen short on that too. I think there may be something wrong with us. We've got to reevaluate, do we really have the level of gratitude for God that we should? And if we do, why are we not sharing that with other people? Are we embarrassed? Are we ashamed of it? Do we not want them to think we're weird? Like, what is the reason that we are not praising that we have found the greatest thing in the universe that enables us to make it off of planet Earth alive? Like, if we're not sharing that with people, we got to question our convictions. I think that sincerely is something that we have to consider. So let's look at verses 11 through 12 of Psalm 40. "You, O Lord, will not withhold your compassion from me. Your loving kindness and your truth will continually preserve me. For evils beyond number have surrounded me. My iniquities have overtaken me, so that I am not able to see. They are more numerous than the hairs of my head, and my heart has failed me." He states this in a very matter-of-fact way in verse 11, where he talks about it. He's like, God's not going to withhold his compassion from me. He doesn't say it as like a maybe he will. He just says like, no, I know God. He's not going to do that. His loving kindness and his truth continually preserves him. Okay, again, this is somebody who has learned through their time with God how God is and who he is and how he operates. And that's somebody that has a lot of trust in God because, I mean, let's just be honest, guys, and this is something that is affirmed in the biblical narrative over and over again. David was told by God that he was going to be king of Israel. Do you know how long it was between his anointing and when he actually became king? That's 20 years. David is somebody that knew what it was like to have to wait on God. And I've got to believe, just because I know David's a human and I know how humans operate, there had to be at least some nights where he's exiled and hanging out outside of Jerusalem thinking, is God really going to keep his word? Is he really going to make good on that promise? Why is that not happening more quickly if it's going to happen? You know, I've done that with various things in my life. Why is it that I'm having to be slow walked on getting my degree? Why is it that God's not giving me the job that I want right now? Why is it I haven't met the girl that I want to meet and settle down with? Like, as humans, we just think about these things. And we tend to think if we don't have them now, that it's because God's withholding something from us. This psalm completely blows that out of the water because he says with assurance, God's not withholding his compassion from us. He's not keeping things from us because he's just a killjoy and wants to keep things from us. No, he's got his reasons, guys. Now, did God make David king? Yes, he did. Did God restore to Job all that he had and more? Yes, he did. Did God give Abraham his promised kid? Yes, he did all of those things. He didn't necessarily do it on our timetable. He didn't necessarily do it when they thought he was going to do it. But the point is, he did it. And when he made them wait, that wasn't just him withholding his compassion or withholding his blessings. He had a reason for doing that. So the question goes back to one of the questions we asked earlier. Do you trust God enough to believe that he is going to do something, and whether he's just holding it off for a season or holding something back from you completely? Do you have that level of faith that says, you know what? Whatever God is doing, and I don't know what that is, whatever God is doing in my life, I know he's not doing it because he's withholding his compassion or his kindness from me. He's got a good reason. And his truth will preserve me. So in verse 12, the circumstances of verse 12 do not change the truth of verse 11, which is interesting. Because he's talking right there, he says, evils beyond number have surrounded me. My iniquities have overtaken me so that I am not able to see. This is not something that happened in the past. This is something that he's saying, this is something that has continuously happened to him, that he has been overtaken by evil. And it's so funny that it happens right on the tails of verse 11. You see, the fact that there are evils around him, the fact that his life has problems, that doesn't negate verse 11. In fact, it sets verse 12 in the proper light. That's why verse 11 comes first, is because God's not withholding his compassion by allowing bad things to happen to him. He's not withholding something from him by allowing him to even fall into iniquity and being overtaken by that. Ultimately, God is the one that's in the right, and the psalmist is the one that has to work on some things. And that's what David is acknowledging there, that all of these things, they're a failure on him. And that's why he ends that verse with saying that my heart has failed me. I am convinced that the idea that God wants me to be happy or just follow your heart, that's one of the worst pieces of advice anybody can give. Now, that doesn't mean the heart is inherently a bad thing. Like, obviously, David has a really good heart. God talks about it over and over again. The reason he is selected as king is specifically because God tells Samuel, you see the way that men see them. I am looking at this boy's heart, and I know he's going to be a good king. He knows that. And so it's not that the heart is inherently evil, but how many people has Satan ensnared by saying, just listen to your heart. Just listen to your heart. Because that means I'm going to find all of the answers inside me. And that's just not real. Because you're a flawed human being. You're a sinner. You're not going to find all the answers inside of you. I'm sorry. Like, I know it's a letdown for some of you. It was a letdown for me when I realized it. But you know what? Ultimately, it was a little bit of a letdown, but it was mostly a joyous thing, because then I realized, well, if the solutions are not inside of me, then that means that my inadequacy is not something that can't be overcome. Because if the lesson is look inside your heart, here's the thing. Eventually, everybody that does that realizes their own inadequacy. They realize that they're not enough. And when you realize that and you think that that's what you're supposed to do and that's all there is, then you're doomed. But if you realize that and you realize, well, that means the answers must be somewhere else, that there is a way out, that there is hope, and then you find God, that's what happens. And that when he transforms your heart, when he works on your heart, that's when you can start listening to your heart when it's being properly guided by him. See, the heart is not inherently a bad thing. It's a bad thing when it starts chasing things that aren't God. When your heart is tethered to God, when it actually seeks after him on a daily basis, the way that David did, and again, he didn't always do that perfectly, but when his heart was actually following God and his commands, David does pretty well for himself. And that's true of every single person that's listening to me right now. Don't listen to your heart. Listen to God. He'll guide your heart. And when your heart starts desiring him and wanting him, then you can start listening to your heart more often because it wants the thing that's actually good for it. So let's look at verses 13 through 15. Be pleased, O Lord, to deliver me. Make haste, O Lord, to help me. Let those be ashamed and humiliated together who seek my life to destroy it. Let those be turned back and dishonored who delight in my hurt. Let those be appalled because of their shame who say to me, aha, aha. So this is funny to me because he's mimicking laughter there. In verse 13, why would God be pleased to rescue us? Think about that. Because he says, be pleased, O Lord, to deliver me. Why? Why would that be something that pleases God? Because he loves us. When are you pleased to help other people? Aren't you pleased to help other people because you care about them? Even if it's a stranger. You know, the feeling that you did something good and that you helped out your fellow man, that's a good feeling. And so it does please us to help people out and to save them if we can. And God's the same way. He has a bigger version of that. When are you pleased to be helped? Well, I think one of the things that we could say is we're usually most pleased to help another person when they're very grateful for it. You know, when you do something, when you sacrifice something, or when you risk something to help somebody out, and they're really appreciative and you can feel that, that's when you really delight in delivering somebody. God's the same way. Is he going to rescue you whether you thank him or not? Yeah, in a lot of cases he will. Doesn't mean that he's going to grant you salvation by you doing nothing. I'm not preaching that. What I'm saying is God helps out. He brings rain on the just and the unjust, y'all. And it pleases him to do that even when the person hates him, because that's his child too. They may not be a Christian, they may not be in his kingdom, but he's their creator and he loves every single one of them. And so because of that, it pleases him to rescue us, and it certainly pleases him. And the angels in heaven sing and rejoice when a lost soul comes back to him. And so, yeah, it delights him to rescue people. That's probably the thing he likes more than anything else. And in the same way that we appreciate it when we can do that and we can extend that to somebody else, God really enjoys that too. And then in verses 14 and 15, this is called an imprecatory prayer for God's justice. So this is actually the psalmist saying, hey, take out the bad guys. Take out the people that are jeering at you because they're jeering at me, and jeering at me, they're jeering at you. You know, in making fun of God's anointed, they're also making fun of God. And so that's what he's saying, is that God's justice should fall around on the people who scoff at him, because he understands and realizes that ultimately they're not really making fun of him, they're making fun of God. There's a great quote by Abraham Lincoln, and I think that it's probably one of the best quotes we've ever had from anybody that's been the president of these United States. I remember he said once, because he was asked by somebody, he said, do you think God is on our side in this war, talking about the Civil War? And he said, I never worry whether or not God is on our side. I'm much more concerned with whether or not we're on God's side, because his side is always the right one. That's the attitude to have. You know, whatever side God's on, I'm going to make sure that I get on that side. I'm not going to try to like woo God over to my side. That's not how this works, because God doesn't move. I'm going to be the one that goes to God and make sure that I'm doing the thing that he wants me to do. And I think Lincoln, you know, really exemplified that in his life. Let's look at verses 16 and 17, and this is the end of the psalm here. So he says, let all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. Let those who love your salvation say continually, the Lord be magnified. Since I am afflicted and needy, let the Lord be mindful of me. You are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, O my God. So this is the wrap up of the whole thing. You see, in verse 16, he talks about all those who seek God. They rejoice in him, they are glad in him. There are those who do not seek God, and they don't want to be saved. And that's sad, and it breaks God's heart, and it hurts his feelings, and it does those of the believers as well. But this is something that is expressed, for example, in John 3:16, for whoever believes in him. That means whoever. That doesn't mean like certain people or only the Jews or only the Gentiles or certain people if they make over a certain amount of income or if they have this skin color or if they belong to this. No, none of that. Whoever seeks out in God and rejoices and is glad is glad in him, they're going to be the beneficiaries of salvation. And those who love his salvation say continually, the Lord be magnified. You see, again, this is more foreshadowing of a time where there is going to come where anybody, no matter who they are, where they're from, can come to the Lord and say, I want your salvation. And they will go out continually talking about their salvation and saying, the Lord be magnified. In other words, they're going to go forward praising him because of what he has done. And so we've kind of brought this thing full circle here. And then in verse 17, the psalmist is saying, I'm afflicted and needy, but let the Lord be mindful of me, be my help and my deliverer. You are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay. You see, there's a recognition for the need for God. It's an if-then statement. Because I am afflicted and needy, let the Lord be mindful of me. Because he's my deliverer, and because you are my deliverer, don't delay, God, because I need you. That's what he's saying. He's saying, look, I'm not enough on my own. There's people after me. I've got enemies. I've got problems. You have all the things that I need. So, Lord, please don't forget me. Please be mindful of me. Please help me out here. But he says it with confidence because the very next line is, you are my help and my deliverer. You see, he understood that ultimately God was going to be the one that saved him. God was going to be the one that helped him out. He didn't say it as like, please be mindful of me. I mean, he is saying that, but he's not saying it in a sense of, well, I would really appreciate it if you would. He's like, no, God, I need you. I need your help. And because I know who you are and I have this experience with you, I've lived life with you, I know that this is a request you're going to honor. Don't necessarily know how you're going to honor it. Don't necessarily understand every single aspect or every detail of how that's going to look, but I do know you're going to. So don't delay, oh my God. And that's really it, guys. That's the 40th Psalm. One of my favorites, like I said, an all-time classic. I love this Psalm. I love it. There's so many moving parts to it. It's only 17 verses. It's a very short Psalm, but man, it's just so rich and deep. And the crazy thing is you'll find that in a lot of the Psalms. Like I think Psalm 40 is one of the better ones, but there's none of them that are bad, and they're all theologically deep if you really dig into them like that. So I would encourage you to, throughout the day, if you want to engage in a study and understand who God is and what his character is like, just take a perusal through the Psalm, pray some of the Psalms, just open up the Psalm and literally read it as a prayer to God, because Psalm 40 is a good example of one that it's a good idea to do that with, especially if you're in a situation where you need some help and you understand how much you need God. Psalm 40 is a great place to go there. So that was all I had. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight. I appreciate your time. And I do want to say this before I let you go. If you don't feel that God is your salvation, or he has not delivered you, or you don't have that tight-knit relationship with God where you've learned to trust him over the years, like we were talking about in that Psalm, there's a very simple way to do it. It's not that hard. The Bible gives you very clear instructions for us. We're supposed to hear the word and we have to believe it. We do have to have faith in him, John 3:16. We have to confess our sins before men, as the book of Romans tells us in Psalm 10, 8 through 10. We have to repent of our sins. We have to come before him and be willing to change our ways. We see that oftentimes, for example, in Luke 6, 3 and 5. and then we ultimately have to be baptized. 1 Peter 3:21, Acts 2:38. We have to be baptized and we have to enter in that relationship with him, and that is how we come in contact with his blood and how we are ultimately saved. And then eventually we have to not just have that one moment where we're trusting God, but we have to continue to trust God the way the psalmist expressed. That comes with the living faithfully, Romans 2:10. So ultimately, you have to be able to go through those steps, but those are steps that are laid forth exactly the way the psalmist expressed. It's not because we're trying to make it into a checklist or anything. It's because God requires obedience, and the obedience is the thing that He's actually after. And so when we trust Him and we put our faith in Him enough to be able to look at that and say, God knows best. This is what God told me to do. I'm going to do that. That's the thing that really pleases God ultimately. And that's really the thing that we have to focus on. But if you have not done that yet, and um, if that is something that you understand and realize that you need in your life, feel free to contact me. You can contact me in the comments here. Feel free to write me or my email address, tacticsradio@gmail.com. Feel free to get in touch with me and reach out to me, and I'll be happy to help you out with that or answer any questions that you've got. But that's going to be it for us tonight. Thank you so much for being with us. Stay the course, friends.